Hello, everyone. It's good to see you. And in today's class, we're going to be looking at the system lifecycle. This is a very important topic, uh, key topic in IGCSE, and I want to talk about it. Okay, key areas that every learner should know about. Yeah, every learner should know about. So let's proceed. In this video, I will be covering stages, processes involved in replacing the computer system, ranging from analysis of an existing system right to evaluation of the new system. To begin this class, suppose a company has been using an existing computer system for a number of years, and they have decided to replace the current system with a new one. After a number of years of successful operation, there will be a need for an upgrade. The question is, what would initiate this need for an upgrade? What's the criteria for them to say, okay, let's initiate the need for it? The first thing that I would like to think about is the fact that the computer equipment they have been using for years is now obsolete. And I might also add that probably there have been repairs, and it has got to the point that probably they can't even repair it anymore. It could be changes to laws requiring radical overhaul of software. It could be more suitable hardware. It's now available in the market. It could just be, let's think about the fact that it could just be a possibility that there is a need to expand the organization. And if they need to expand the organization, this would prompt an upgrade. And this changes is going to involve a computer expert known as the system analyst, which needs to be brought into the organization, which is going to oversee the whole upgrade process. And the first task there becomes analyzing what is on ground, talking about the existing system, suggesting a number of improvements that can be made. And all this improvement, of course, comes with cost. And once this cost have been noted, it is being reported to upper management. And the upper management can now look at it and say, okay, now we have this, now we have the budget with us, now we have what it takes for the new system. And once it is approved, okay, then system is developed. And once it's fully tested, it is implemented, documented, evaluated. And if there are going to be any changes necessary, will be done. So what I've just talked about is a cycle taking place until a full working system is in place. And this whole process is what we call the system's life cycle. So here we see the table of content, things that we need to discuss about. things that we need to talk about, from analysis to design, development and testing, implementation, documentation, and evaluation. So very important. Okay, so let's take note of that. Now, let's look at this. There are many stages in the system's life cycle. Okay, and it's all been summarized to this. Now, let's look at the phases. It begins with analysis down to design. And notice the arrow here. When it gets to development and testing, it is this arrow here is what we call a two-way process. And in the two-way process, because when the system is being developed and tested, there may be a need to redesign. It is in this process that it may uncover that need, discover that need to what? Redesign the solution several times, multiple times, before the system is developed again, tested, and then it goes to implementation, it goes to documentation, and finally to evaluation, and it goes back again. So this is what we call, right, the stages in the system life cycle. So let's begin with analysis. Now, the stages of analysis, right, is this: research the current system, identification of input and output, what processes takes place, problem with the current system, user requirement for the new system, what are the information required, identifying what the hardware and software of the new system. And permit me to just talk about other ones before I come to research the current system. Now let's look at identification of input and output, because it's in this particular stage that we need to find out several things here, especially the what input and output takes place, what processing is done, okay, what problem exists with the current system, and how as much as possible we can be able to find user and information requirement of the new system. One method the analysis uses is what we call the DFD, called the data flow diagram, okay, which has a lot of description and arrows to be able to point to each one of them. So we look at user requirement of the new system. The problem to solve is this: customers, the computer system developers don't really understand how the business works. They only just develop TikTok. They only just develop Facebook. Okay, but they don't really know how the system could help them, right? The user requirements are designed to help with this problem, right? So we're seeing where we are getting feedback from the users, okay, and of course, these user requirements are therefore they are written by system analysts for the business manager, because the analyst is getting the feedback from the user, and of course, they're written in natural language, just English language, right? Of course, they add some little bit of technicalities to it, okay? And the whole idea is to allow the customer to check that the system analyst what the system is proposing, and again, is exactly what it originally specified. I want a TikTok where I'm able to, okay, I want a TikTok longer than 1 minute. Yeah, I'm tired of 1 minute. I want a TikTok longer than 3 minutes. I can't be creating content for just 1 minute. It's stressful. I need more. I need more time. My creative instinct is so much that I need more time. And these requirements are key. And when we look at information requirements, right? Information requirement, we're looking at the information that is needed to support the business. In this case, the case study, we're looking at TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn. And this information requirement is made up of the following. Take note of this, right? What in terms of the data, when in terms of the timing. And the system analyst turns the information and user requirement into a functional requirement specification in such a way that we can be able to know who the customers are and how they can be able to interface with the system. A platform, a user interface that can be able to interact with the system. Okay, very important. When we talk about identification of hardware or identifying the hardware and software of the new system, it simply means what are those hardwares and softwares that will be needed for the new system. Okay, if it's a supermarket, are we looking at printers, scanners, monitors, respectively? This for the printers and monitors are your output. You're looking at the scanners. If it's a monitor, the touch screens, right? Right. Of course, the touch screen can be seen as an input and output. Okay, very, very important. That is very important. Now let's go to something right here on your screen. So looking at researching the coin system, there are 4 methods used to researching the coin system. And right here we have observation, questionnaires, interviews, and examination of existing document. Now, let's look at observation. And in this case, I will be talking about, let's describe this research method. When we talk about analysis, this is a method that involves watching personnel using the existing system to find out exactly how it works. Okay? So here you can be able to see the system analyst right here, watching the personnel making use of the system. Now, when we look at this picture, we can be able to bring out a lot of advantages in such a way that, one, the system analyst is able to obtain reliable data. Reliable data. Okay? And also, the system is able to see the input and output of this coin system. And not just that. With this particular description, we can see that the system analyst is able to have a better overall view of the system. However, why the system analyst is getting a very good view, is an inexpensive method. What about the personnel? People don't like being watched when they're working. It makes them feel uncomfortable, right? And we'll all agree with that. It makes them feel uncomfortable. And that simply leads to what we call a Houghton effect. Very important. Okay? And if workers are performing any form of task that is contravening standard, right, procedures in such a way that there's a particular way I like doing my work, but if the management is looking at it and probably don't like the way I work, I might not actually I might not do it that way. I might just do something to please them, right? Even if it's not coming from my mind, but just do something to please them, right? But that becomes interpretive for the personnel. And we have to look at that. The next thing we want to talk about is questionnaires. When we talk about questionnaires, right, this method involves the questionnaires, distributing questionnaires to the system users to find out their views of the existing system and to find out how some of the tasks are carried out. So looking at this wonderful young lady, okay, system analyst getting questionnaires and stuff like that, right? Okay, so what can we say? We can say that in the questionnaires, the questions can be answered fairly quickly. It can be answered fairly quickly because we're distributing them to the personnel. It also allows for a quick analysis of the data. See that? A quick analysis of the data. And we can see that the interviewees, right, can fill the questionnaires in their own time. Why? Because these questionnaires are given to them and they are under no pressure to be able to fill it, and they can fill it in their own time. Okay? Most of the time, one key advantage that we need to take note of is that since they can remain anonymous, they can say some things that are true about the system. Nobody's going to know it's me anyway, right? And also, it allows a great number of people to take part, because this is where this is where these surveys are being distributed to so many personnel, and multiple people or many of the personnel can be able to participate on it. However, the returns of the forms are low. Okay, and the questions are rather rigid because they have to be generic. They have to be generic. Okay, so there is no, it's not possible to do a follow-up question. It has to be rigid in such a way because these forms are sent and you just want to get a quick yes or no, or what's your view on it, as much as possible. There's no immediate way to clarify a vague answer to a question. So you can't even expand the answer to say, okay, what do you mean by this? What do you really mean by this? Okay. And because they're anonymous, the interviewees may not take it seriously. Okay.
I'm sorry, sir, you were breaking up a bit on my end.
Okay. Interviews. Interviews. This method involves a one-to-one Q&A. When we talk about one-to-one Q&A, we're talking about between the system analyst, okay, and the user. And it is a good method, right? If the analyst wants to probe deeply into a specific aspect of the existing system. So we can see that an advantage here is the fact that it gives an opportunity for the system users, the personnel, to be able to give open and honest response. Okay. It also allows, okay, the system analyst to be able to probe for more feedback, probe for more feedbacks from the interviews. The system analyst is able to what? Modify the questions as the interview proceeds. It is in this method that the system analyst can be able to watch for body language and facial expression to see if probably the system, the computer users, right, or the personnel is just giving the interviewer the answer they think they want to hear, which becomes a disadvantage. And another key thing I want to talk about is the interviewee may not be available at the time of the meeting. That becomes a possibility. That becomes a disadvantage. And it's a rather time-consuming process. It is very expensive because it simply means that you need to employ not just this young lady, but multiple system analysts. It's very important. Examination of existing document. Now, when we're talking about the examination of existing document, what are we talking about? Now, examination of the existing documents simply means that the system analyst is able to look at the document of the existing files that are kept, look at how they operate, check the accounts, and this is where the system analyst is able to just get an idea of the scale of the problem in terms of memory size, type of input and output. And it has some good advantage. And the advantage here we want to talk about is the fact that the system is able to obtain information that is not possible in any other methods. And not just that, the system analysts can be able to see for themselves how the current system operates. However, the disadvantage becomes it is a very time-consuming exercise. Because of this, and it's time-consuming because it simply means that you have to go through all the documents as much as possible. And because of the analyst time needed, right, it is a relatively expensive method. Relatively expensive method. In the design phase, okay, so once the existing system has taken place, the system analyst has a better idea of the scale of the problem. Okay, the next is to design that method. That's the next thing, to design. And we begin by looking at the file structure. So when we talk about the file structure, it simply means that a database has to be in place, where we have to look at what the database is, which is a collection, the organized collection of data, right? It is used to store and retrieve data. So it is an organized collection. And here we're able to look at files, right? And a file is made up of what? Numbers of records. Okay, so all this becomes a file. And the record is then broken down into what? Fields. Okay, and one of the fields must be unique. Okay, one of the fields must be unique. I will talk about fields. They are what? A single item of data. That's what a field means. Single item. Okay, if you're watching, you can pen down this. They are single items of data. Okay, and one of the fields must be unique. Okay, and will act as a primary key field. What's a primary key? Primary key is to hold unique data. We'll talk about unique data. Unique, we're talking about no two data must be the same in that field. They can't have two same data because they have to be different. That's what we're talking about. And when we talk about the foreign key, it simply means that it is a primary key in another table. It holds the primary key value in another table, and they help to create relationship. The next thing we want to talk about is data types, your data structures. And under data structure, we're looking at data types. And we'll talk about data types. Data types refers to the type of data that should be in a field. And we have the following data types right there on your screen. So we have alphanumeric, okay? And alphanumeric stores characters, which is your letters or text, and then numeric data. And we have example here. And then we have character. This is just a single letter. So for example, you have A or T, right? And then you have text. And your text here are what? Strings of character. That's what they are. Strings of what? Your characters. Okay? Or numbers or other what? Symbols. Okay? So here, for example, I'm having Ajiro underscore tag. Okay? And this becomes a text. When we talk about Boolean, Boolean, it is a data type that stores a yes or no or true or false. So you have T or F, Y or N. Okay? And then we have numeric. Numeric are used to store numeric data. Okay? And which is used to perform calculations. And excluding the telephone numbers. And we have different types of numeric data. So we have integers, which are whole numbers, and examples are here. Okay, decimal or real, and then we have them to be this. This is 2 decimal place. And then we have currency. This what is an inclusion of a currency symbol. So the difference between a decimal, which is a non-integer value, is the inclusion of what? The currency symbol. And then we have date and time. And permit me to, so let's talk about the date and time. Now, in the date and time, it has the format as dd/mm/yy. And for time, it has HH colon colon SS. But in database, we have an issue with this because M has already been assigned to what? To month. This is day, month, year. That's what it means. Day, month, year. And this means hour, minutes, right? And then seconds. So we get the idea. But in the database, this M has already been assigned to month. And we cannot have the same variable with the same thing. So it means that we have to allocate another letter to represent what? The minute. And this is where we now have, this way is now being changed to HH colon NN, right? Colon SS. So this now represents what? Minute. Why? Because N here has already been assigned to month. And the N here, now, since we have changed the letter, we can now assign it to what? To minute. This is very, very important. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So here we have a classwork here, right? And so I want you to do me a favor. This is a classwork, and you can just pause it, right? Try to attempt it yourself. And if you're unable to do that, and then you can just press play. Literally, just press play, and you can now see what I've done. Okay, but try to do it yourself. Just pause the video, try to do it yourself, and then yeah, you can and see how it works. Okay, so here we have the feed length, right? So the feed length here is this. It simply means that this is the length that each of the field has, right? So it must not exceed each of the field length. So for example, for product description is 40. So anything outside 40 is not going to work. So now we have a hint here, okay? The hint here is this, the table we've been given. So now they say, okay, let's look for the data type of the product code. So we have the product code here. And now in the records here, what then becomes data type? So looking at this, what we have talked about on the types of data type, this becomes what? Alphanumeric, because we're seeing numbers and characters, right? We're seeing numbers and letters. So this becomes what? An alpha what? Numeric. Alphanumeric. Then year of manufacturing, look at year of manufacture. And what do we have? They're all numbers. So this becomes what? Numeric. But what type of numeric is this? So this becomes what? Numeric integer. Product description, this product description, look at it all here, and you can see from a glance that this becomes what? A text. Price, but notice there is what? A currency. So we look at this price, the currency here, it is decimal, but because it has currency, this becomes what? A numeric currency. And department, this department is just TTAAB, that becomes what? Character. Okay, so if you've done that, bravo, yourself, round of applause for yourself. Okay. All right. Validation routines. So when we talk about validation routines, what do we mean? Okay. So what do we mean? Now, when we talk about validation routines, we're simply saying that there are certain checks that needs to be in place in our fields. Okay. So when we talk about validation, this is the process. Okay. This is the process, okay, where data entered into a computer is checked to see if it satisfies what certain criteria. And please take note, this is an automatic check that is carried out by the computer. Okay, so the whole idea is not to check that the data is correct. The whole idea is to check that the data entered is sensible, is reasonable. Very, very important. Now let's look at certain validation checks. Let's look at certain validation checks. So we have the range check, and let's talk about the range check. So in the range check, right, this simply means that this checks to see that it checks to see if the data entered lies between an acceptable lower bound and upper bound. Okay, for example, you have a test score. You have a test score, right? You have a test score, and in your test, you have 1, 2, or 30. So this becomes a range. So it simply means that whatever values that you're going to impute into that field must be within this acceptable what lower and upper bound. And you also have something in the slide about temperature, right? So whichever one is fine. The next one is type or character. So the whole idea is that type or character checks to see that if the data entered is of the correct type. So of the correct type simply means that you have a name, and in the name field, you are not expecting to have a number. Make sense? You're not expecting to have a number. Okay? And if you have an age field, you're not expecting to have a text. So this type and character checks to see if the data entered is of the correct type. And when we talk about length, for length check, it checks to see if the data entered contains only, notice the word, only the required number of characters. For example, I have age, and the length for age is probably 3. So it simply means that anything, somebody can be 1, right? Somebody can be 10, somebody can be 100, but I'm very sure nobody's 1,000 years old. Okay? Nobody's 1,000 years old, right? So it simply means that becomes a length. Format. For a format check, it checks to see if the data entered into the field is of the correct format. And in this case, we have it as your DD /MM/YY. So example of this would be 09, okay, 05, and 24, which is the time this video is actually being recorded. In case you're watching it in 5 years from now. Okay. So yes, right? The whole idea. So it's very important. So here that we have DD, MM, and YY simply means that this is another kind of format. Okay, so we can have different kinds of format, but it has a structure with a forward slash. Also note that it can also be a space, right? It can also be replaced by a space. So that's very important. Okay, very important. Okay, we have presence check. So for the presence check, it checks to see that data entered into the field is not left empty, and it goes with the required field with an asterisk. So it simply means that that particular field is what is compulsory. That particular field is what is compulsory. And then we have check digits. Now for check digits, it is an extra digit added to a number, of course, which can also be calculated from other digits. So the whole idea is that for the check digit, it can identify 3 types of errors. One is if 2 digits have been transposed during the input. For example, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, we are now having 1, 2, 4, 3. This should be an error. And again, if an incorrect digit has been entered, okay, incorrect digit in this case could be I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm now having what? 1, 2, okay, I'm having what? 3, 3. Or then you have 4. So these are incorrect digits that have been entered. Or a digit is missing. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm having 1, 2, 3. So a digit is missing, or an extra digit added. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So this is very, very important. Validation alone is not enough to reduce errors. It's not enough to reduce errors. Okay? But before that, we have a classwork, right? We have a classwork. So let's look at this classwork real quick and let's see how we can attempt it, right? It said give a stable validation check. So what I want you to do is you can pause the video, okay? Attempt this classwork and then hit on play for the correction. How cool is that? All right, so the following data is being entered into a database. Give a suitable validation check for each of the 5 fields. A different validation check must be given for each field. Okay, so let's look at it. So we have name. So what check is it? So we have type, search character, check. And if you got that, bravo. And then we have date of birth, and we have it as what? Format what? Check. And if you got this again, bravo. Okay, so we have telephone number. Now, telephone number usually can be with applause. Okay, it can just be with your local number with an O. So in this case, we can probably use what we call a check digit to ensure that we don't have more than required. Very important. And then we have the other reference number, and this can just be a length. Okay, a length check. And for the sex, male and female, this is the required field, right? So it simply means we can just go with presence what? Check. And which field could be used as the primary key field? Now we talk about primary key that used to hold unique data. We can't have a name, we can't have a date of birth. So the obvious one here is going to be what? The other reference number. Okay. The other reference number. So I was talking about the fact that validation is not enough to reduce errors. You need verification. But I've had a session of this, the video of this somewhere on my YouTube channel. I've talked about verification chapter 15, proofing, and we had to do a whole session of it. But because we already have it here, I'm just going to just do a very quick sweep, right? So the whole idea of verification is just to prevent errors when data is copied from, in this case, from your paper to the computer, right? And you need to take note that verification does not stop all errors. It doesn't. It just helps to reduce the errors when data is entered. It only checks to see that whatever is being copied from the paper to the computer is correct. And we have 2 types. We have visual verification, double data entry. We'll talk about visual verification, or sometimes called visual check. It simply means that you're comparing the original paper document with the data entered into a computer. Okay, so you're just checking that document that you have, right, to ensure that it is entered into the computer, right? Very important. For double data entry, it simply means that the data is entered into the system twice. Okay, it can be by 2 different sets of people. Okay, and these 2 sets of data that have been entered in the computer is then compared by the computer, and if there is a difference, right, it is flagged as an error and it can then be corrected by the user. Proofreading simply means that the document has to be read and reread, okay, before it can be printed. The whole idea is to detect any form of errors using your spell check. This is very important in document production. We've had a session of this already on my YouTube channel. Chapter 15, it's right there somewhere. Just look for it, right? Okay, we've had a session of it, and we've done the practicals on it. When we're talking about spell check, doing grammar check, punctual conversion, it was very, very an enlightening moment. Trust me. right? So this is very, very important, okay, to check whether or not they were in the original document. So this is very, very important, right? So it's very important, okay? So it's a bit different. It's more than just verification, because if the original data contain errors, then with the verified data, it will contain the same error. So proofreading just helps to remove any of these errors by checking the data is correct, by doing the spell check, grammar check, and punctuation conversions as much as possible. In the input formats, which is your data capture form, okay, it's very important because this form ensures that the data is input into the computer in the correct format. So we have two types, paper-based and the computer-based, right? So in the paper-based simply means that these are forms that are printed. So it simply means that it must have a heading, okay? It must have a clear, it must make it, the form has to be clear in such a way that the person filling the form knows where to put the answers. And of course, it must make it a form of text box, okay? Text box which can limit um, the amount of information. So if you're wondering what a text box, this is a text box, yes. Okay, and of course, character boxes, okay, for data such as surname. So you could have character boxes like this. This is a character box, okay. So we can have this as Ajiro, yes, and I think yes. Okay, okay, and of course, the use of tick boxes to make choices. I've talked about the printed text box. Make sure there's sufficient space to write your answer. Okay, and of course, the fonts are very important. Make sure you use a clear font. For the computer base, okay, for the computer base, it's important that you make use of text box to capture key data clearly. On screen help, when you completed the form, they have to be kind of a help, right, in such a way that they have to usually denoted with a question mark, right, in such a way that that works as much as possible. Okay, so you can have the help form something like this. Okay, a question mark, yeah. Okay, drop down, right? So you have your drop down here. So this can be a drop down. Okay, video button. So you can have video buttons. Okay, this can be a video button, right? Tick boxes. You can have this for tick boxes. Okay, and of course, automatic validation of data as it is entered, right? Your control buttons, that's your buttons here. This can be a button. You have submit, you have save, okay, etc. Right? You have clear. Okay, yes, very, very important to actually ensure that this information. Also, double entry boxes, right? To check the correctness of your data. Very important. So here I have my form, showing you my form. Very nice form, right? Okay, so if the output is on paper, then consideration must be given to the type of output, especially your headers and footers, right? In your headers and footers, they have to be on your paper-based form in such a way that for every page, there is the same information telling them what to do, right? About the headings as much as possible. If it's on the computer, the database, right? They have to be form of search, and it should show as much as possible. It should show as much as possible where they can be able to search their work. Okay, so here you have your text box, you have your drop down, right? Drop down, you have your video buttons, and of course, you have what? Your control buttons. Okay, so I'm expecting you to know this. Very, very important. The next thing we want to look at is development and testing, DNT. It's not design and technology, okay? No, development and testing. Okay, so we have our test designs. Okay, so we'll talk about our test design here. We're just simply saying how we can probably test each and every one of them. Okay, very important in terms of data structure. How do we test our data structures and those designs to determine if we can test all the data in the correct format? In the file structure, we are testing that the file structure functions correctly. In the input format, we're testing that all the data can be entered into the system correctly. In the output format, we're testing to see that the screen output and report and the correct format. And finally, for validations, we are testing to see if all the validation rules work. Very important. The next thing is the test strategies. When we talk about the test strategies, right? Please take note. Software is often developed in modular forms. And what do we modular form? It simply means that they are developed into bit by bit. Somebody is doing one part of the software, another programmer is doing another part of the software. We call them teams of programmers or separately by a programmer. So this modular forms or this method is broken down into smaller parts. And those smaller parts are known as what? Modules. So this programmer might be working with on a separate model, right? And the other programmer will be working on what? On a separate model. One person can be working on the quality of upload to your TikTok account. One can be working on profile. One can be working on the database. One can be working on forms. One can be working on this as much as possible. And while they are working on them separately, there is a need to test each of them separately. So here you have that for the first model, right? Let's call this your profile on TikTok, right? So this is your profile on TikTok. Okay, you want to have a good profile, right? So this is your profile, right? So it simply means that what happens is that this needs to be tested. And this will all make sense in car manufacturing. When you know that a cars, each parts are what being tested, are being developed separately, and they have to be tested separately before they're compiled together. So here is one model where you have to modify the model if there are any errors found. And once you modify them, you test. So once you test, it goes back again, try to modify them. If there's no error found, then it's okay. But if there's any error found during the testing, then it goes back again. So this is a process it goes through. The second model, it has to be tested. It goes through the modification process, has to be tested. And if it's okay, fine. If it's not okay, it goes back to that phase. And that happens to each and each and each and each of them until all of them are fully tested and working okay, and they are now being combined, integrated into one final program. And then that final program, which is now the car, is now being tested. Okay. And if there's any error, modifications are made and it goes back to the same process. Make sense? So when you have the final program, you try to modify it, test it again, and if there's no errors that are found, then it's fine. But if there's any error that's found, it goes through the process. All this may lead to need to improve the input and output methods. Okay, and then we have to go through the whole process. It's a very time-consuming process, but it has to be perfect as possible before users make use of the data. Before users makes of the data. So let's talk about test plans. So what are the test plans? Now, once the test strategies have been determined, it then becomes necessary for us to be able to put up a checklist. Yeah, a checklist. Let's use that, right? What we call the test plan for each of the modules, right? Even for the final program. Okay, so here we have a list of all tests to be performed. A list of all tests. What are the tests we're going to use to perform on the software? What data are we going to use in the testing to ensure that the validations are working, as much as possible? Every design, everything in the software, every model is working properly. What data are we using? Okay, what type of testing are we going to use? And we're going to look at those testing in a moment. Okay, we're looking at the live data. So there's going to be a kind of a better test where some users will be opportunity to use it to see how well it works. What's the expected outcome from the testing? Now it has a better testing. What's the expected outcome? And you see it most of the time, before any software goes live, there is a beta version. And okay, let's talk about Windows. There's what we call the Window Insider program, in such a way that only people in the Window Insider get to make use of the beta version before we have the Wii version to see how it works before it goes live for everybody to use. Okay, do the actual outcome match what is expected? That's the next thing. Do the actual outcome match what is expected? That is very key. So now that we have all this, right? Is it matching what we wanted, what we wanted all along? Okay, it is very important. Now the system is fully tested. Okay, it cannot be tested with what? In live data. We'll talk about live data. We're just be talking about these are data with known outcomes, right? Data that you and I are going to be using in the system. Okay. Now let's talk about the type of data. We have normal, abnormal, and extreme. So in the normal data, right, we use to impute this, right? And we're using DDMMYY, and under DDMMYY, we're just using the month to just explain this. We're using the month. And month has 1 to 12, 1 for January, 12 for December. Now we'll talk about the normal, right? The normal data. It simply means that these are data, right? With what? An acceptable, right? And has an expected outcome. So we can see that there are data that lies within what the acceptable what of validity and has what an expected what outcome. So in this case, we are having our normal data here to be from the range of 1 to 12. We're having them to be, example, for normal data, we're having them to be 4 or 6. That's normal. Okay. Why extreme? This is the data that lies within the boundary or limit of what? Acceptability. And it has what? 2 M values, the lower or upper bound. So in this case, the extreme data is going to be what? Either 1 or 12. So this can be 12. This can be 1. But for abnormal, this is the data outside the boundary or limit of what? Acceptability, and should be rejected or cause an error message. Okay? Or cause an error message. For example, we have 1 to 12. What becomes the abnormal data? Anything lower than 1, anything greater than 12. Negative becomes abnormal. Letters become abnormal. For example, instead of 1 and you write ONE, this is what? Abnormal. Okay, so I've given you examples of what is abnormal using the month. This is very, very important. Even 0 is abnormal. Okay, 0 is abnormal. Very important. So here we have a class 1. Okay, so do me a favor. You can just pause the video and try to do it yourself. And if not, you can follow what I'm about to do. But try to pause it, try to do it yourself, and you can always play the video to see what you've done. So use the examples of a date in the format DD/MM forward YYY, using the latest month when answering the following 3 questions. Okay, probably 5, not 3. Okay, 5. All right, so let's look at this. Okay, consider the following 20 pieces of data and decide which of them is normal, abnormal, or extreme. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 pieces of data. Okay, so let's work with this. Now, they said using the latest what? Month. So the latest month at the time of recording this video is April. Okay, and April has how many days in it? Right? April has 30. So sorry, this is May, rather, sorry. This is May, not April. This is May, right? And May has up to, I think, 31. I'm not sure. 31 or 30. Okay, 31. I think 31. Okay, so it has 31. Okay, so we have 31. So we have 1 to 31 for day. Okay, so let's look at this. And of course, for month, we have what? 1 to 12. And for year, what do we have? We have, as of the time of this recording, we have what? To 2024. Right? So let's work with that. So here we have the month 15. There is no month that is 15. So this is what? Abnormal. Month 7. 7 of in the month is July. So this is perfectly normal. 31 in this day, because May has 31, this becomes what? Extreme. 2025, as of the time of this recording, is abnormal. But when you're watching it in 2-3 years, probably it could be normal, it could be extreme. Okay. Now, 1992, this is perfectly normal, right? So this is normal. So it all depends in what year you're answering this question. Okay. Implementation. Once the system is fully tested, the next stage is to fully implement it. And how do we begin to implement it? How do we fully begin to implement it? So let's take note of this. So here we look at direct changeover. Now, for direct changeover, what are we looking at? Right? With this method, the old system is stopped overnight. So when we are implementing using what? A direct changeover. But take note, before we look at this, how do we transfer the files or the paper files or electronic files to the new system? Before we start looking at all the implementation phases or changing over to a new system, how do we transfer? We can transfer using what? Scanning in the documents. We can also key in the data, right? We can key in the data. We can download files to what? The new database. Now, changing over to a new system is 4: direct changeover, parallel running, pilot implementation, phase implementation. Now, when we look at the direct changeover, I said with this method, the old system stops overnight and new system is introduced immediately. So what happens is when the system has been developed and tested, and we are implementing, right? We're implementing the system. With direct changeover, the old system stops working immediately. And the new system is what being introduced. What becomes the advantage and disadvantage in that particular changeover? Watch. For advantage, the benefits are immediate because only one system is being used. Okay, so we need to know that. All right. However, for no advantage, costs are reduced. Simply means that you are using one system and you're not using what? Only one set of staffs are being paid, not two sets. So the immediate benefits are being seen, right? The benefits are immediate simply means that you are seeing the new system working live. But when we talk about costs are reduced, right? Instead of like in the parallel way both systems are running, you only have one set of system running, and that simply means in terms of cost, you're only paying one person. Disadvantage becomes if the system stop working, it becomes disastrous because there's nothing to fall back to. In that new system that you are implementing, if it's not properly checked and it stops working, it can be a nightmare. But in parallel running, this method means both the old and new systems are being run side by side for a period of time before the new system takes over. What becomes the advantage? If the new system fails, the old system is still available for backup. You have not lost everything. You can just keep doing what you're doing and then you can fix it. And it is in this method you can what? Train the staffs gradually on how they can be able to use the new system. Okay? Disadvantage becomes that it is very expensive than the direct. Because why? You have two sets of staffs. One staff using the new system and another staff using what? The old system. Okay? And it's time consuming because it simply means that every data that you have must be entered into both systems, both the old and both the new. For pilot phase, for the pilot implementation or running, what do we have? For pilot, it simply means that the new system is introduced in only one branch. For companies that have multiple branches, Google, for example, let's talk about Google. Google has so many branches in the country, right? I've been in the program, right, in the partnership program, and I know about it, right? So we have HQs in the US, we have HQ in Singapore, and we have HQ in Ireland. These are 3 HQs that Google has. These are 3 HQs, right? The one that is within Africa is the one that's closest to home, which is what the Ireland. Very, very important. Okay, so they can decide to implement this new system in one branch. Okay, of that company, and they try to assess the performance of that system before it is being introduced to what every other HQ and branches. Okay, so what becomes the advantage here? With this method, it is possible to train staff in one area, which is a bit much faster and less costly than parallel, in which all the whole branch is making use of 2 systems. In comparing to parallel, the costs are less because it's only one branch that the system is being implemented. But what becomes disadvantage is that if the new system fails, only one part is affected, which is still bad. And finally, we have phased implementation. Now, in phased implementation, it simply means that the new system are introduced bit by bit. They are introduced in parts. This part is introduced, and that part is fully assessed before, and it is assessed and it's okay, the next part is introduced. What becomes the advantage here? The advantage becomes that if the latest part fails, it is necessary for you to go back to the point of failure and then work on it, but it doesn't affect the system because it's only part by part that is being brought. So if that latest part fails, go to that point that it was working okay, and then continue, and they work on it. Right? It is also possible to ensure that all the part works before expanding. So you're bringing them bit by bit. Once all of them are working together, then you cannot fully implement them. Disadvantage is it is a very time-consuming process because each part needs to be fully evaluated before making any further changes to the system. So it's very time-consuming because each part needs to be fully evaluated. And it's more expensive than direct because we have to evaluate each phase before moving to the next phase. So it's more expensive. Okay, very important. Please, this is very, very important. Okay, now once the new system is fully developed, a considerable amount of documentation also needs to be produced for 2 people. Take note of this, 2 people. The programmers or system analysts, that's the people who need to modify or develop the system at some point, right? You look at the end users, people who are going to use it. So there will have to be documentation for 2 people, technical documentation and user documentation. So what's technical documentation? Technical documentation is for what? The system analysts, for programmers, developers. So it is designed to help the programmers to what, or system analysts to what, make improvement to the system or repair or maintain what, the system. So it's designed to help the programmers to be able to improve the system. When they bought Twitter, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, there was a documentation. Imagine if there was no documentation in Twitter, he wouldn't have bought it. So there was documentation. So from that documentation, okay, this is what we have. We can now improve Twitter forward. Okay? You can also repair, you can also maintain the system. But for user documentation, this is just designed to help you and I. If you buy any electronic, it comes with a manual. It comes with what? A manual. That manual is called what? User documentation. Even when you buy your smart TVs, there's always a manual. If you buy your ACs, your air conditioning, there's a manual on how to operate it. Everything has a manual. Even when you buy your phones, There's a manual on how you can operate it. So that manual we call for users a user documentation, because it's designed to help the user to know how to use that software or system, to help them learn how to use it. So what are the things that are found in technical documentation and what are the things that are found in user documentation? Now, for technical documentation, we have program listing, the program used, the codes. You have the programming language used. What programming language do you use? Do you use Python? Do you use Java? Okay, very important. Okay, do you use C++? What programming language do you use in developing that software? What are the program flowchart and algorithm? What is the graphical? We'll talk about algorithm, we'll talk about step by step, right? Step-by-step sequence in which we carry out to solve a particular problem. We'll talk about the flowchart. We're talking about the graphical representation of that algorithm. So what's the flowchart? How did you go about in developing a software? System flowchart. Okay. Purpose of the system. What's the purpose of the system or software? What's the limitation? Are there any limitation of the software? What are the things that the software cannot do? What are the input formats? If they want to input data, what are the data they can input on that system? What have been imputed on the system? What are those input formats you use in testing the system? Hardware requirements. What are the hardwares that were used in developing the system? What are the software used in developing the system? Minimum memory requirement. What are the memory requirements used? Known bugs. When we developed the system, what were those bugs means error. What were the errors that was used? List of variables. Okay, what are the list of variables used? File structure. What database did you use? Sample runs. Okay, that's with result and actual data, test data used. What were the sample runs you used during your beta testing? Output format. How does it look like? All these things should be part of the documentation. Validation routines. Meaning of error message. For user documentation, for users, there has to be a documentation. And that is, how do you load the software? How do you run the software? How can you save a file? How can you do a search? How can you sort data? How can you print out? How can you add, delete, or amend records? What's the limitation of the system? What's the purpose of the system? What's the screen layout or print layout of the system? What's the hardware requirement? We've talked about them before. What's the software requirement? What were the sample ones? User want to know, okay, this one was used. This was the result we got. What's the meaning of the error? Troubleshooting guide. Then if I have an issue, what do I need to do to fix that issue? How do I log in? How do I log out? You might be surprised that many people don't know how to log out from TikTok. Yes. Many people don't know how to log out from TikTok. Many people don't know how to log out from Instagram. Many people don't know how to log out from LinkedIn. Many people don't know how to log out. Okay? So this is important that all these things are there in the documentation. What are the tutorials? Is there any video tutorials or written tutorials that will guide people on how to fix certain problems or where and where they need to go to? Meaning of error message. What does each error represent? When we have an error, 404, we have this error. What does each of them mean? Glossary of terms. Okay, what each term represents in the software. When we see profile, what does profile mean? When we see upload, what does upload mean? Now take note. The text highlighted with red are the ones that are similar between technical and user documentation. Please take note. The ones highlighted with red are the ones that are found in technical and also found in user. Okay, very important. So following the implementation of the system, technical documentation needs to be written. Identify 3 components of the technical documentation which are not found what? In user documentation. So let's look at those things that are not found in that couple of technical which are not found in user. So I have my answer here. So do me a favor, you can pause the video, try to do it yourself, and then you can play it. Okay? So 3, so I have 1. I have program listing. 2, programming language use. 3, system flowchart. There's so much, right? I can go on and on. I can go to known box used. I can go to file structures, validation routines, right? If I want to add more validation routines or validation rules, I can have um, what else? I've talked about the program codes, program flowcharts. I have program flowcharts. Okay, program flowcharts, etc., etc. Right? Final phase is evaluation. Once a system is up and running, it is necessary to do some evaluations. Okay, and carry out any maintenance if necessary. So this is the part where maintenance is being carried out. Okay, so the question we ask ourselves, okay, the questions we ask ourselves is, there is a list of things to be considered when evaluating how well the new system has worked. Now we have the system working. Let's see how well it's working. And when we ask these questions and they are not being answered, this can ultimately lead to a redesign of parts, if not the whole system. And if there's a strong suggestion that tends to that we need to. So what are the questions that we ask? What are those things that we need to evaluate? We compare the final solution with the original tax requirement. Now we have this final software. We compare it with what design. If you look at buildings, right? You have a design, a model of a building. By the time the structure is built, you compare what is in the design, what I bought, is it what I got? They say what I bought versus what I ordered. What I saw versus what I ordered. Okay, that's how you see it, and when you have ordered it, is it the same thing, right? Just I'm using that literally to just explain this. You identify any limitation of the system. What are the limitations of the new system? What are the improvements that needs to be made? What are those things? Now we have designed the new software. Are there still improvements that we can make on it? Okay, we evaluate user response, and this is why each time there's an update, TikTok, Instagram, Google, they always ask for feedback. What do you think of the update? WhatsApp, what do you think of the update? Do you like the new design? Or maybe, do you like it? Okay, they ask those questions, right? Compare test result from the new system with the result from the old one. So you look at the test result of the new system and you look at the test result of the former one. Which is better? You look at the performance of the new system, you look at the performance of the old system. Is the new system working better than the old system? You observe how the users are performing tasks on the new system. Is it easier for them with the new system? Is it easier with the new updates in WhatsApp? Or do you prefer the old one? There are some times that WhatsApp had to downgrade because it was easier with the old one. So sometimes, Instagram had to downgrade because it was easier with the old one. So they compare. They observe user performing the what? They set tasks and they compare the old with the new. They measure the time it takes to to perform the new task. What's the time to upload the picture back then and the time to upload the picture now? So you look at all those things. You use interviews to gather response. You can use interviews. You can use questionnaires to gather response about how the new system is and how well it's working. Okay? Some result of evaluation may lead to two things. Once the evaluation has been done, it can lead to two things. Number one, update of the hardware. Because of feedback from end users, that's one. Two, it could be new hardwares is in the market. So the new hardware in the market, we might need to get them to enhance our performance. It could be changing within the company. right? That will require some devices to be added or updated. Another one that it could lead to, from the evaluation, it can lead to update of software because of what? Feedbacks from end users. Also, it could be what? Changes to the company structure or how the company works. It could also be what? Changes in legislation that may require modification to the software. Okay, so here we have a classwork. Very important. So do me a favor, pause the video, try to attempt it yourself, and if you're done, then hit on play. Right? So let's do this together. So they said put the following 6 stages of the system lifecycle into the correct order. So the first one I have is analysis. I have design. Okay, don't forget this is a two-way process. So I can have another arrow here. This is what? Development. Okay, development and testing. Development and testing. Development and testing. Analysis, design, and testing. We have implementation. We have documentation. We have evaluation. And it goes through that process. Which 5 computer terms are being described below? Let's look at this. A changeover method where the old system is stopped overnight and the new system is introduced straight away. So this becomes what we call direct changeover. A changeover method where the new system is introduced into one branch of the company and its performance is assessed before being introduced in all companies' branches. We have it as what? Pilot. Okay, we have it as pilot implementation, or what? Running. Type of validation that checks whether or not the correct number of characters has been entered. So we have the type of validation to check if the correct number of characters has been entered. Okay, so let's look at the type of validation to see if that correct number has been entered. So we have the length, correct number, so it's length check. Part of the system lifecycle that considers data capture forms, file structure, validation and screen layout, design phase. Software development technique where the program is broken down into smaller parts and each part tested separately. So we have that as what? Test strategies. So we have that as what? Our test strategies. Okay, very, very important. Okay, so this brings us to the end of the class. Thank you very much.